When I was 12, my brother disappeared for 3 days. My parents told me to say he was visiting a cousin. There was no cousin. He came home bruised and quiet. I asked what happened. He said, "Don't ask." Years later, I learned where he'd really been. I woke up late that morning, the sun already pushing through the blinds, spilling over the bed where Evan should have been. I rubbed my eyes, expecting to see him lying there, blanket tangled around his legs, like always. But the bed was empty. No shirt left on the floor, no shoes kicked off beside it. Just nothing. I stood there for a second, staring at the blank spot where he'd been, the quiet pressing in around me. I could hear Mom in the kitchen, humming as she made coffee. I figured maybe he'd gotten up early or something. Maybe he was downstairs already. So I pulled on my sweatshirt and went to find him. Mom was by the stove, stirring something in a pot. She didn't even look up when I walked in. "Where's Evan?" I asked, not sure why it came out like that. Like I already knew the answer, but needed to hear it anyway. Mom froze for a second, the spoon hovering over the pot. She turned slowly, her eyes too wide. I didn't think anything of it at first, but then she said, real calm, "He's visiting a cousin." I blinked. "A cousin?" She nodded, like it was the most normal thing in the world. "A cousin we've never met. He went upstate for the weekend. He'll be back on Sunday." I didn't say anything. I just stared at her, my mind clicking and whirring, trying to place the pieces. But no, there was no cousin. No one had ever mentioned a cousin. Not once. I tried again, because something about this didn't sit right. Upstate? I've never heard of this cousin. Why didn't he tell me? Mom's face tightened, and she shook her head, the smile coming back on like it was the easiest thing to fake. "Michael, I'm telling you he's fine. It's not a big deal. Just don't ask questions." Her voice shifted into that tone, the one that meant the conversation was over. It was the same tone she used when I was younger and asked why things fell off, why Evan acted weird, why Dad always seemed so distant. Same tone she used when she told me nothing was wrong, even when everything in the house felt wrong. I couldn't keep my mouth shut. But she cut me off, her voice low and sharp now. "Michael, drop it." I took a deep breath. I wasn't sure if it was because of her tone or something else, but I felt it. Something wasn't right, and I didn't know how to fix it. I felt small, like she was trying to make me small, like she thought if she said it enough, it would be true. I opened my mouth to say something else, but she looked at me, real serious now, and said, "Don't ask about Evan again. Not to me, not to anyone." She didn't need to say any more. I swallowed hard and walked out of the kitchen, trying to ignore the knot in my stomach. I grabbed my backpack from the hallway and left for school. The whole morning felt off, like I was walking through water. But the silence followed me. It pressed in tighter as the day went on. At school, I couldn't concentrate. I sat in class, staring out the window, watching the cars drive by, wondering if anyone else noticed the gap where Evan should have been. Everyone kept asking me where he was. Everyone. Friends, teachers, even people I barely knew. And I had to tell them the same thing. Evan was visiting a cousin. I felt like I was swallowing stones every time I said it. I wasn't sure if I was lying to them or lying to myself. Maybe both. When the bell rang at the end of the day, I was walking through the halls when I saw Kira, Evan's girlfriend. She was standing by her locker, staring at her phone, looking lost. She looked up when she saw me. "Where's Evan?" she asked. Just like that. Straight to the point. I didn't know how to answer her. He's visiting a cousin," I said. But even as the words left my mouth, I could see her face tighten, like she already knew what I was going to say. She shook her head. "A cousin? There's no cousin, Michael. I'm not stupid. He hasn't mentioned anyone like that." I tried to laugh it off. "Yeah, well, I don't know. That's what Mom said." Kira's eyes burned into mine. She stepped closer, voice shaking a little. "I know something's wrong. You know something's wrong, too." I didn't answer. I just looked at her. This girl who knew Evan better than anyone, who could see through the bullshit, and I couldn't even give her a real answer. Before I could say anything, she let out a shaky breath and walked away, eyes full of frustration. I stood there, feeling like I'd failed. Not just her, but Evan too. The day stretched on, but I barely heard the lessons, the chatter, anything. I could only think about the hole Evan had left behind, and the story I had to keep telling. I didn't know what happened to Evan, but whatever it was, I could tell it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. By the time I got home, the house felt quieter than usual, like the walls were holding their breath. I found Mom in the kitchen again, doing the same thing she always did after school, putting away dishes, moving around like everything was fine. She didn't even look up when I walked in. But I felt it. She was waiting for me to ask again, waiting for me to crack. I stood there for a long time, just watching her, my mind racing, but I didn't say anything. I couldn't. But I knew one thing. Evan wasn't gone because of a cousin. Something else was going on, and I was going to find out what. The next day at school, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything was off. I didn't want to be there, didn't want to be anywhere, really. But the second period bell rang, and I had to get through the day somehow. I was walking to class when I saw Kira standing near the lockers again. She caught sight of me and didn't waste a second. She marched right up to me, her face flushed, eyes wide with confusion and frustration. "Michael, where is he?" she demanded. I froze. All the words that had felt rehearsed and easy at home suddenly dead in my mouth. The same story, the same lie. I wanted to say it, wanted to just repeat the same thing to get her off my back, but it didn't feel the same anymore. Not after the way she'd looked at me yesterday. "Mom said he's visiting a cousin," I said anyway, my voice shaky. She crossed her arms, her lips tight. "Bullshit. There's no cousin. Don't lie to me." I felt my stomach sink. Kira wasn't like the other kids who asked and then let it go. She knew. I could see it in her eyes, that sharp, burning kind of certainty that cut through the walls I'd built around myself. She shook her head. "Michael, tell me where he is. I know something's wrong, and I know you know too." I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. All I could think about was how it would feel to tell her the truth, to just come clean and let the lie unravel. But I couldn't. Not yet. Not like this. I don't know. I stammered, feeling like I was drowning in my own words. Kira's face twisted with hurt. "You're lying," she whispered, but her voice was thick with tears she wasn't letting fall. I stood there, helpless, feeling every ounce of guilt pile on top of me. I should have told her. I should have told her something, anything, but I couldn't. She turned away abruptly, wiping her eyes, and walked down the hall, shoulders stiff. I watched her go, a weight heavy in my chest. The world felt wrong, like it was spinning on a different axis, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't get my feet under me. By the time the bell rang for lunch, I was already checked out. I didn't want to be here, didn't want to deal with anyone. So, I slipped out of the cafeteria and found a quiet corner by the back stairwell. It was the only place I could escape to without hearing everyone ask the same questions I couldn't answer. I pulled out my phone, hoping to distract myself, but I couldn't focus. I kept thinking about Kira, her face when I lied, the disappointment, the confusion. And then, as if on cue, I felt the vibration of a text. It was from my mom. "Lock the door when you get home. Don't answer the phone unless it's me or Dad. And stay away from anyone asking about Evan." The message was short, clipped, but it hit me in a way I wasn't ready for. It felt like another layer of the walls closing in. I didn't reply, just slipped the phone back into my pocket and rubbed my eyes. I was already exhausted. The rest of the day dragged by in a blur. I wasn't really there, not in any real way. The teachers talked, the students passed notes, but my mind was stuck on Evan, on Kira, and on what was happening at home. I was playing a part, and I was starting to lose track of where the act ended and I began. When I got home that afternoon, everything felt too still. The house was quiet, and the only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator. I dropped my backpack by the door, and before I could even take my shoes off, I heard Mom's voice, sharp and quick, coming from the kitchen. "Michael, lock the door," she said, not looking up from what she was doing. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me, and went over to the deadbolt, sliding it into place. I wasn't sure why, but a nervous pit settled in my stomach. The instructions weren't just about safety, they were about control. I was about to turn and head to my room when I heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. My heart thudded harder in my chest. It was Dad. I didn't even need to look out the window. I could tell by the way Mom stiffened that something was wrong. Her hand was trembling as she put the kettle on the stove, and I could hear her muttering something under her breath, but I couldn't make it out. When the door opened, I didn't even recognize the person standing there. Evan stepped in first, his eyes distant, hollow like he wasn't really here. His clothes were torn, and his hair was matted against his forehead. But it was the way he moved that shook me. The slow, heavy steps, the shoulders slumped like they were carrying the weight of the world. I didn't know what to say. I just stood there, frozen. It wasn't until Dad closed the door behind them that I heard Evan's voice, low and soft. "I'm home," he muttered, barely audible. Mom was at his side in a second, her hands on his arms, guiding him towards the kitchen. But I didn't move. I couldn't. I watched them, my mind spinning. What the hell happened? Why didn't he say anything? Why didn't he look at me? The house felt colder than it ever had, the walls closing in again, tighter this time. And I realized, I wasn't sure if I'd ever get the truth. I stood frozen in the hallway as Mom guided Evan into the kitchen, her voice soft but urgent, like she was trying to coax him out of whatever nightmare he was living in. He didn't speak, didn't even look at her. His face was blank, like he wasn't sure where he was or who he was with. I felt like an outsider in my own house. The door creaked shut behind me, but I didn't move. I couldn't. I waited a few beats, long enough to hear Mom's muffled voice from the kitchen, but not enough to make out what she was saying. Finally, I dragged myself into the living room and sank into the couch, staring at the TV without seeing it. Everything was quiet, but the air felt thick with something I couldn't name. After what felt like hours, I heard a soft knock on the door. I didn't get up. I didn't want to. But then Dad walked in, his face tense, eyes dark, like he hadn't slept in days. He didn't even look at me at first. He went straight to the kitchen, his footsteps heavy on the hardwood floor. The door clicked shut behind him. I wanted to say something, anything, but I couldn't. It was like I was locked out of my own family, a bystander to whatever was happening. I spent the next hour on the couch, trying to make sense of it all, but nothing connected. There were too many pieces, and none of them fit together. The door to Evan's room was closed. The house was quiet again. I couldn't help but feel like I was waiting for something to explode. Mom and Dad never talked about what happened to Evan. They just kept pushing it down, locking it away. And the silence felt worse than anything. When the clock hit 7, I finally stood up, my legs stiff, my stomach tight. I couldn't stay in that room anymore. I crept down the hall and stood outside Evan's door. It was closed, but I could hear him moving inside, the sound of something scraping against the floor. It was almost like he didn't even know I was there. I knocked, but there was no answer. Just that strange silence again, the kind that made my heart beat faster. "Evan," I said quietly, almost too quiet, like I was afraid of disturbing whatever fragile piece he'd found. The door opened just a crack, and his face appeared, his eyes bloodshot, tired, but still haunted. I didn't know what to say. "Can I come in?" I asked. He didn't answer right away, but after a long pause, he stepped back, letting the door open wider. I hesitated for a moment, then walked in. His room was just as I remembered it, except it felt different now, darker, somehow. The bed was unmade, the windows half shut, letting just enough light through to cast shadows on the walls. Evan was sitting on the edge of the bed, his hands resting on his knees. He didn't look up when I walked in, just stared at the floor, like he was trying to shut out the rest of the world. I sat down beside him, not sure where to start. "Are you okay?" The question felt dumb as soon as it left my mouth, but I couldn't help myself. I needed to know something, anything. He shook his head, but not in response to me. It was like he was trying to shake something off, something that wasn't going away. "I'm fine," he muttered, but the words were flat, lifeless. I wanted to argue with him, wanted to tell him that he wasn't fine, that everything about him, everything in this house, felt wrong. But I didn't. Instead, I just stared at him, waiting for him to say something that might make sense. After a long silence, he finally spoke, his voice low. "Don't ask me about it, Michael. Please." I felt my chest tighten. "What happened?" Evan's jaw clenched, and he stood up abruptly, walking to the window without saying a word. I didn't move. I knew better than to follow him, to push him for answers. He stared out the window for a few seconds, the light from outside making his face look even more pale. Finally, he turned back to me. "I don't want to talk about it. Not now." His voice was colder than I'd ever heard it before. "I can't." I nodded, even though it hurt to hear him say it. I knew I wasn't getting anything out of him right now, and I wasn't sure when I would. But it didn't make it easier to swallow. I need you to trust me on this," he said, his voice quieter, almost like he was pleading. "Please." I stood up, finally feeling the weight of everything pressing in. "I don't trust anyone right now." I didn't mean to say it, but the words were out before I could stop them. Evan's face darkened, and for a moment, I thought he might snap at me. But he didn't. Instead, he looked away, his eyes tracing the cracks in the walls, like he was trying to find something to focus on. "I know," he said after a long pause, barely above a whisper. "I know, Michael. But you have to. You'll understand later." I wanted to scream at him, demand that he tell me everything, but I didn't. I couldn't. Because deep down, I knew he was right. Whatever was going on, whatever happened to him, it wasn't something I was going to understand just yet. I stayed in his room for a few more minutes, but it felt like hours. Finally, I gave up, nodding stiffly and turning to leave. Just before I reached the door, I heard him say my name. "Michael." I paused, but didn't turn around. "I'm sorry," he said. "I really am." I didn't answer him. I couldn't. I just stepped out of the room, closing the door softly behind me. And as I walked down the hall, I realized something. I didn't know what the hell was going on, but it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The next few days passed in a kind of haze, where the edges of everything felt soft and out of focus. Evan stayed locked in his room most of the time, only coming out for meals. Even then, he barely spoke. Mom hovered around him, constantly checking in, but it was like he wasn't even there. I could see it, feel it, the distance growing between us, between him and everyone. I tried talking to him a couple more times. The first time, he shut me down with a look before I even finished the question. The second time, he said he couldn't remember anything, that it was all just a blur. I didn't push after that. It wasn't like I had a choice. The silence stretched on, filling the house in ways that nothing else could. Even when we all sat together at dinner, the air was heavy with unspoken things. Dad didn't say much. Mom tried to keep things normal, asking about school or the weather, but it was clear no one was really listening. Then came the Sunday morning when Evan left for school. It was his first time going back since. Whatever happened, Mom made sure his breakfast was ready and handed him his bag like everything was normal. But there was this tightness in her shoulders, a quick glance between her and Dad that didn't go unnoticed. I watched him as he grabbed his coat and headed for the door, the sound of his shoes on the hardwood echoing in the quiet house. When he turned to leave, he barely looked at me. "I'll see you later," he said, his voice flat. I nodded, but I didn't say anything. There didn't seem to be anything left to say. That night, after I'd gotten home from school, I found myself on the couch, staring at the TV without really watching it. My mind kept going back to Evan, to his face when he came back home that day, to the way he hadn't looked at me, hadn't spoken about anything that mattered. I kept thinking about the lies we'd been living and the ones I was still keeping. The sound of the door opening caught me off guard. I turned just in time to see Evan slip in through the front door. He didn't say anything when he saw me. He just walked past, heading straight for his room. For a moment, I just sat there, my stomach twisting. It felt like I was trapped in this loop where nothing was moving forward, just circling in place. And I hated it. I hated the silence, the distance, the way everything felt like it was happening without me. I stood up, the urge to confront him sudden and strong. My feet carried me down the hall, and before I could stop myself, I was knocking on his door again. This time, there was no hesitation. "Evan," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He opened the door, his face blank like always. He looked tired, like he hadn't slept in days. But this time, something was different. There was a crack in his usual mask, a faint flicker in his eyes, like he was barely holding it together. "What?" he asked, his voice flat but quieter than usual. I could feel the weight of everything that was unsaid between us. It was suffocating, but I had to say something. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, stepping into the room before he could close the door. "Why are you pushing everyone away?" He didn't answer right away. He just stared at me for a moment, his jaw working like he was trying to hold something back. Finally, he sighed and stepped aside, pulling the door open wider. "You really want to know?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Evan looked down at the floor, and for a moment, I thought he wasn't going to say anything at all. Then, without lifting his gaze, he spoke in a low voice. "I don't know how to fix it," he said, almost to himself. "I don't know how to make it go away." I felt a cold shiver run through me. "What happened, Evan?" He didn't respond, his hands tightening into fists at his sides. His face twisted in frustration, like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. I could see the cracks in his composure, and it scared me more than anything. "I can't tell you," he finally muttered, his voice small. "I can't." My chest tightened. "Why? You're my brother, Evan." "I'm not going to." I said I can't, he snapped, his eyes flashing for the first time in days. "I don't want to drag you into it. You don't need to know." You don't understand what's going on. He walked away from me, moving to the window, staring out like he was looking for something, anything, to focus on other than me. I stood there, caught in the same place I'd been from the start. Then why don't you just tell me what happened? Why don't you let me help you? I don't need your help, he bit back, his voice rising. I don't need anyone's help. I recoiled at his words, like he'd physically shoved me. But I stayed where I was, my mind racing. I didn't know what else to say. I didn't know how to get through to him when he couldn't even get through to himself. He let out a long, shaky breath. I need you to stop asking me about this, Michael. I need you to let me handle it. It's not your problem. My throat tightened. How can you say that? It is my problem. You're my brother. I'm not just going to pretend like nothing happened. Evan turned then, his face pale, his eyes dark and full of something I didn't recognize. You don't get it, he said, the words sharp, his voice cracking. You don't know what it was like. You don't know what it did to me. I opened my mouth to respond, but he cut me off. I need you to stay away from it. Just let it go. And with that, he closed the door, leaving me standing in the hallway, hollowed out and helpless. I stood there for a while, my mind screaming with everything I didn't know. And when I finally turned away, I realized one thing. Evan was already gone, even if he was still here. I didn't knock this time. I didn't need to. I stood there outside Evan's door for what felt like forever, my hand resting on the doorknob. I had to know. I had to push through whatever wall he was building around himself, even if he hated me for it. I was done pretending I didn't know something was wrong. Finally, I opened the door. Evan was sitting on his bed, the sheets bunched around him, staring at his phone. He didn't even flinch when he heard the door creak open. For a second, I thought he might just let me stand there, like nothing had happened between us. I shut the door behind me, the silence swallowing everything. I'm not leaving until you tell me what happened. He didn't look up. His fingers moved over the screen, slow, like he was trying to avoid the inevitable. You need to go. His voice was flat. No. I crossed the room and stood in front of him. You're not doing this to me again, Evan. You're not locking me out. He exhaled sharply, finally meeting my eyes. But there was nothing in them. Not anger, not sadness, just a kind of emptiness. You don't want to know. Why? I asked, my voice tight. Why do you keep saying that? Why won't you just tell me? I'm not going to leave you like this, Evan. You don't get to shut me out anymore. His jaw clenched, and I could see it. He was struggling with something, some battle in his head. It's not just about me, okay? It's about everything. You don't understand. You wouldn't. I knelt down in front of him, so close our knees almost touched. Try me, I said, barely above a whisper. I've been trying to understand for weeks, and I can't. What the hell happened? He flinched, like my words physically hurt him. His hand tightened around his phone, his knuckles white. I don't know how to explain it, he said finally, his voice cracking. I can't. I don't want you to know. I stayed silent for a long time, just looking at him, trying to see past the mask he'd put on. But there was nothing there anymore. Just the same face I'd grown up with, the same person I'd looked up to, now twisted into someone I couldn't recognize. I swallowed, trying to get the words out. Why don't you want me to know? Are you scared, Evan? Are you scared of what I'll think? His eyes snapped up, and for the first time, there was something in them. Anger, frustration, all these emotions tangled together. Yeah, I'm scared, he said, his voice rising. I'm scared that if I tell you, you'll see me as weak. I'm scared that you'll hate me for not being who you think I am. I'm scared that if I open my mouth, it'll break everything. That I'll lose you too. The words hit me like a slap. I didn't know what to say at first. I didn't know how to handle the fact that Evan, my brother, was scared of me. Of me, the one person who should have had his back no matter what. Evan, my voice faltered. I'm not going anywhere. You don't get it. I'm not going to hate you. You're my brother. Nothing changes that. He shook his head. You don't get it. You can't get it. I don't even know what happened to me anymore. I'm just trying to survive it, and you. He trailed off, his words hanging in the air like unfinished thoughts. I felt something break inside me at the rawness of it all, at how much he was suffering, how he was trying to carry this on his own. I want to help, I said, my voice steady this time. Whatever happened, whatever it is, you don't have to carry it alone. For a long time, he didn't respond. He just stared at the floor, like he couldn't bring himself to face me. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely a whisper. It's not that simple, he said, his words slow, like they were being dragged out of him. I'm not the person you think I am, Michael. I've been lying to you. To everyone. I took a deep breath, my chest tight. I'm not asking for some perfect version of you. I just want to know the truth. Your truth. Evan looked up at me then, his eyes raw and full of something I couldn't name. It's not just about me. It's about what happened, what they did to me. He stopped himself, his throat working like he was choking on the words. I leaned forward, my heart pounding in my chest. What? Who, Evan? Who did this to you? He shook his head, the tears finally breaking free. I'd never seen him cry, not like this. I don't want to say it. I don't want you to know. But I couldn't stop. You have to tell me. Evan took a deep breath, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. It was Adrian. He took me, held me against my will. He did things. And I couldn't escape. I was scared, Michael. So scared. His words hit me like a physical blow. I felt my breath catch, my stomach twisting. Adrian? Evan's ex-boyfriend? The one who'd always been way too intense, way too possessive? I couldn't speak for a moment. My mind was racing. He hurt you? Evan nodded, the look in his eyes breaking me. I couldn't tell anyone. He threatened to hurt you. Mom, Dad. I begged them not to go to the police. I told them it would be worse if they did. And they listened, Michael. They listened. I couldn't breathe. It was like the world had just shifted, like the floor had been pulled out from under me. I wanted to scream, to punch something, to make it all go away. I should have told you, Evan whispered, his voice breaking. But I didn't want you to see me like this. I didn't want to lose you, too. The words were too much, too heavy. I couldn't even process all of them. But I knew one thing. It wasn't over. Not by a long shot. And whatever happened to Evan, I was in this with him. The silence in Evan's room was suffocating. I could feel the weight of everything he'd just said, crashing down on me. My mind was spinning, trying to make sense of what he'd just confessed, but it all felt like too much. Adrian had hurt him, and I was just learning about it now? Evan was still sitting on the edge of his bed, looking like he was somewhere far, far away. The tears had stopped, but his face was still wet. I stood there for what felt like forever, trying to find the right words, but nothing felt right. I should have known, I muttered, almost to myself. Evan's eyes flicked up to meet mine, sharp. No, don't do that. Don't blame yourself. I opened my mouth to say something, but the words stuck. I wasn't blaming myself, not really, but it was hard not to feel like I should have done something sooner. Like I should have noticed the cracks in the story, the little things that didn't add up. Why didn't you tell anyone? I asked, my voice rough. It felt like the simplest question, but I could see how hard it was for him to even look at me, let alone answer. He looked down, his fingers picking at the fabric of his jeans. Because I didn't know what to do. I thought if I don't know, kept my mouth shut, it would go away. But it didn't. It just stayed. I swallowed, a lump forming in my throat. So you just what? You just stayed silent through all of it? You didn't think you could tell Mom and Dad? I couldn't. His voice was barely above a whisper. You don't get it, Michael. Adrian's family is powerful. His father's a defense attorney, and his uncle's a judge. If I went to the police, they would have found a way to shut me down. They would have made sure it looked like I was the one who was crazy. Like I was the one who deserved it. I stared at him, trying to wrap my head around the fact that he had lived with that fear, that pain, all on his own. I wanted to scream, wanted to break something, but all I could do was stand there, feeling helpless. Why didn't you come to me? I asked, my voice shaking. I would have believed you. You know I would have. I know, he said, his voice cracking. But I didn't want you to get dragged into it. I didn't want anyone else to suffer because of what Adrian did to me. I thought I could handle it alone. But I couldn't. I felt the floor fall out from under me. This whole time, this whole damn time, I thought he was just shutting me out because he didn't care. But now I realized it was because he cared too much. He didn't want to pull me into a mess he thought I couldn't fix. I moved closer, sitting down next to him on the bed. I'm here, man. You don't have to keep carrying this. Not alone. Whatever happens next, we'll face it together. For a second, I thought he was going to pull away, but he didn't. He just sat there, shoulders tense, staring at his hands, like he was trying to figure out how to believe me. Promise me you won't tell Mom and Dad, he said, his voice so low I almost didn't catch it. I frowned. What? Why? You need them, Evan. They need to know what happened. No, he said firmly, shaking his head. They can't know. They already made a deal with Adrian's family. If we go to the police now, it'll break everything. They'll take me away from you, from them. I can't. We can't go through that. I froze. A deal? Evan nodded, his eyes dark. A backroom deal. Silence in exchange for my safety. If they knew everything, if they really understood, they'd never forgive themselves. And they'd lose me forever. The weight of his words hit me like a punch to the gut. My parents had made that choice for him. They'd sacrificed the truth for his safety. But in doing so, they'd kept him locked in this cage of lies, trapped between what really happened and what they'd convinced themselves was better. I sat there in shock for a long time, not knowing how to process it. So we just keep pretending? We just keep lying? Evan's face hardened. If we go to the police now, it'll all come apart. Adrian's family is too powerful, Michael. It's not just about us anymore. It's about everything they've covered up. I opened my mouth to argue, but I couldn't. He was right. As much as it hurt to admit it, we couldn't take that risk. Not with everything at stake. So what now? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. What do we do? Evan took a deep breath, his shoulders sagging. He wiped his face with his sleeve, and for the first time, he seemed like the brother I remembered. Broken, but still trying to figure out how to keep going. I don't know, he said softly. I don't know, but I can't stay in this house forever. I have to get out. I have to. I need to leave, Michael. I need to go away and try to put this behind me. My heart clenched. I hadn't expected this. Not now, not after everything. You're leaving? I asked, my voice thick with something I couldn't name. Evan nodded slowly. I have to. It's the only way to move forward. The room felt smaller all of a sudden. I didn't want him to go. Not like this. But I knew, deep down, he was right. He needed to go. He needed space to breathe, to heal. And I didn't know if I could help him with that. Not here. I didn't say anything for a moment. I didn't know what to say. Finally, I just nodded. I'll be here when you get back. Whenever you're ready. Evan didn't look at me for a second, but then he did, his eyes softer than before. Thanks. I didn't know how much longer we had. But whatever happened next, I wasn't going to let him go through it alone. Not now. Not ever. The days after Evan told me he was leaving felt like I was living in some kind of limbo. He didn't pack much, just a few clothes, a couple of books. He kept to himself, not really talking to anyone, not even me. I understood. He needed to go, but it didn't make it any easier. The night before he left, we barely spoke. I think we both knew the conversation we needed to have wasn't something either of us could handle. So, we stayed silent, the kind of silence that settled in your bones, thick and heavy. I was lying on the couch when the sound of the doorbell startled me. My eyes flicked toward the clock, almost midnight. Who the hell would be here this late? I got up and padded down the hall, my mind racing with possibilities. It was probably just some late-night sales call or someone dropping by for some dumb reason. But when I opened the door, it wasn't anyone I expected. Adrian. He was standing there, his hands in his pockets, his face unreadable. His eyes didn't have the usual spark of arrogance. Instead, he just looked tired. Like he wasn't here to fight or provoke, but something else. Something I didn't want to deal with. What do you want? I asked, my voice rough, not bothering to hide the anger. Adrian glanced over his shoulder, like he was checking for someone else, but when he looked back at me, his eyes flicked down to the ground, then back up to mine. I need to talk to Evan, he said, his voice low, almost hesitant. The sight of him standing there, asking for Evan like this, like he didn't know what had happened, or worse, like he didn't care, made my blood boil. Not gonna happen, I snapped, stepping into the doorway to block him. He's not here. Adrian's face shifted, but it wasn't the cocky smirk I expected. He looked lost. It was a weird thing to see on him. I know he's here, Adrian said quietly, his voice catching. I need to talk to him, Michael. Please. I stood there for a moment, weighing whether or not I should just shut the door in his face. Every instinct screamed to tell him to get lost, that there was no way I was letting him near my brother after everything that had happened. But something in the way Adrian looked at me, the rawness, the desperation, pulled me in. You don't get it, do you? I said, my fists tightening at my sides. He's not your fucking pawn anymore. He's not some kid you can just drag into your mess whenever you feel like it. Adrian looked pained, his gaze flickering to the ground again. I know I fucked up. I know it's not that simple. But you don't understand. What happened with him, it's not what you think. What the hell does that mean? I barked. What part of he kidnapped him don't you get? Adrian flinched at the words. I saw him stiffen, like the reality of it was something he still couldn't face. But then he squared his shoulders and lifted his chin, like he was trying to force some semblance of control back into his body. I never meant to hurt him, Adrian said, voice tight. I never wanted him to go through that. It just got out of hand. Everything got so fucked up and You hurt him, I interrupted, my voice cold as ice. That's what happened. You used him. You don't get to stand here and pretend you're some victim in this. Adrian's eyes flashed with something I couldn't place. Guilt, regret, maybe. But it wasn't enough to make me back off. Not after what I'd seen in Evan's eyes. I didn't mean for any of it to go that far, he said, his voice hoarse. But I need to talk to him, Michael. You have to understand. He's the only thing that matters. I can't lose him. I shook my head, disgust bubbling in my stomach. You already lost him, Adrian. He's not coming back to you. For a moment, it felt like I was watching him deflate right in front of me. The arrogance, the bravado, all of it disappeared. He was just a man who had fucked up beyond repair, standing in the doorway, lost and desperate. I don't care what you think, I said, stepping back to close the door. He doesn't want anything to do with you. So leave. Now. But as my hand reached for the door, Adrian's voice stopped me. Please, just tell him I'm sorry, he said, barely above a whisper. Tell him I'm sorry for everything. I hesitated, standing there with my hand still on the door. I didn't know what the hell Adrian wanted from me. He had no right to ask for forgiveness, no right to try and put any of this on Evan again. But there was something in the way he said it, like it wasn't just for himself, but for Evan, too. I took a breath and opened the door just a little bit wider. You don't get to make this about you anymore. You've done enough damage. Then I slammed the door shut. The house felt quieter after that, almost too quiet. I leaned back against the door for a second, my head spinning. Evan was still gone, still slipping away in ways I couldn't control. Adrian was still out there, trying to rewrite history, trying to manipulate everyone. But it didn't matter. No matter how much Adrian tried to turn back time, Evan wasn't going back to him. And for the first time in a long time, I realized that maybe, just maybe, I could start fighting for the truth. For both of us. I didn't expect it to come the way it did, the way everything seemed to twist and churn at once. But the knock on the door that evening stopped me in my tracks. I hadn't even thought about Adrian anymore, hadn't wanted to. He was gone, or at least, I hoped he would be. But when I opened the door, there it was. A package. I stared at it for a moment, wondering if it was a mistake, maybe something that had been sent by accident. But the moment I saw the handwriting on the outside, Evan's handwriting, my stomach dropped. I tore it open without thinking. Inside was a small, worn notebook, the pages curling at the edges, the ink a little smudged in places. I flipped it open, and the first line hit me like a punch in the gut. I agreed to go with Adrian. I wanted to fix things between us. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. My hands shook as I turned the pages, reading what felt like a confession, Evan's words, but not Evan. The story it told was nothing like the one he'd told me, nothing like the truth I thought I understood. It was a version of events where he had willingly gone with Adrian, where everything that had happened between them was mutual, consensual, and, most gut-wrenching of all, his fault. The last page had a note scribbled across the bottom. The words were messy, almost frantic. The truth has many versions. I felt like the world tilted beneath me. This wasn't just some notebook, it was a weapon. I felt bile rise in my throat as the reality of it sunk in. Adrian had made this. Adrian was trying to rewrite everything, trying to make me doubt what I knew, make me doubt what I had heard from Evan himself. I slammed the notebook shut, my fingers trembling, my mind spinning. I needed to talk to Evan. I needed to hear from him, not this twisted version of him. I didn't even wait for the logical part of me to catch up before I grabbed the notebook and stormed down the hall to Evan's room. I didn't bother knocking. When I pushed the door open, Evan was sitting on his bed, his back to me. He didn't look up, not even when I tossed the notebook onto the bed beside him. What the hell is this? I demanded, my voice tight, a mix of anger and disbelief. Evan slowly turned, his eyes flicking to the notebook, his face draining of color. For a moment, he didn't say anything. He just stared at it, like he was seeing something that terrified him. You didn't tell me this was coming, I said, struggling to keep my voice even. You didn't tell me Adrian was still trying to twist everything around. His face was pale, and I saw something flicker behind his eyes. Fear, guilt, maybe both. He opened his mouth like he was going to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Evan, talk to me. Tell me the truth. Was this you? Did you write this? I stepped closer to him, the urge to shake him growing stronger by the second. Evan swallowed hard, his throat working like he was choking on the words. I don't know, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know it was coming. I didn't want him to do this. I was losing patience, but I forced myself to breathe, to stay steady. Who else could have done this, Evan? This is Adrian's lie. He's trying to make it look like you wanted it. Like you walked into that mess willingly. Evan finally met my eyes, and for the first time in days, I saw something close to defeat in his gaze. I didn't want him to send it to you, he said quietly. I didn't want you to see it. I didn't want you to know that he still has power over me, even now. I felt the anger inside me swell, but I kept it in check, knowing it wasn't Evan I was mad at. He doesn't have power over you, Evan. Not anymore. You're not his to control. Evan closed his eyes, as if trying to shut out the words I was saying. I don't know how to stop it, Michael. I don't know how to make him go away. He's always there, in my head. And this notebook is just the beginning. He's not going to let me go. My chest tightened as I realized just how deep this had gone. This wasn't just about what happened in the past. This was about the aftermath, about Adrian's manipulations reaching into every corner of Evan's life and dragging him back into a place he didn't want to be. I felt the weight of it all. We'll fix this, I said, my voice firmer than I felt. We'll go to the police. We'll tell them everything. We'll make sure this stops. No, Evan said, his voice sharp, his hand holding up the notebook like a shield. You don't understand. If we go to the police, they'll make me look like the bad guy. It'll all come out, the things I told him, the things I let happen, and they'll make it worse. I can't put everyone through that. I looked at him, at the raw fear and shame in his eyes, and I realized how much this was eating at him, how trapped he really was. So what? We just let him get away with it? Evan shook his head violently. No, but I can't risk it. I can't lose everything. The silence between us grew thick again, heavy with unspoken truths and the weight of decisions that neither of us should have had to make. Finally, I took a deep breath, swallowing my own frustration. Then we'll find another way, I said, my voice softer now. But this isn't going to define you, Evan. This isn't the end. I won't let it be. He met my gaze again, his eyes full of something I hadn't seen in a while. Hope. Thank you, he whispered. I nodded, knowing that whatever came next, we were going to face it together. The day Adrian left town was the first time I'd felt any sense of real peace in months. The phone calls had stopped, the lingering threats had finally quieted, and I knew, deep down, that the hold he had on Evan was beginning to slip away. The air in the house felt lighter, like we could finally breathe again. But it wasn't over. Not for either of us. Thanksgiving came a few weeks later. Evan hadn't said much about it, but when he called to say he was coming home for the first time in years, I couldn't stop myself from feeling a mix of anticipation and dread. The truth was, I didn't know what to expect. Would he be the same? Would things ever really go back to normal? When he finally walked through the door, I didn't recognize him at first. It wasn't just that he looked different. There was something in his eyes. Something I hadn't seen in a long time, calm. He wasn't the hollow, broken version of himself he'd been for so long. There was weight in his steps, but it wasn't the same burden. He seemed lighter, almost. Mom and Dad rushed in to greet him, both of them smiling, but I could see it in their eyes. The relief, the hope that maybe things were finally going to be okay. Evan pulled away from their embrace, smiling faintly, but clearly uncomfortable with all the attention. His gaze slid toward me, and for the first time in a long time, he looked like himself, not the scared, isolated version of him I'd known, but the older, more grounded brother I remembered before everything got so fucked up. I stood up from the couch, not sure what to do, but Evan was already walking toward me. He stopped in front of me, the silence between us feeling different now, less like a wall, more like a bridge we were both learning to cross again. He smiled, just the tiniest bit, and then he pulled me into a hug. It was awkward at first, but it felt real. And in that moment, I realized that maybe, just maybe, we could fix this, could rebuild the parts of us that had cracked under the weight of everything that had happened. I missed you, man, he said, his voice quiet, his hand patting my back. Yeah, I missed you too. I replied, my voice rougher than I wanted it to be. We pulled away, and I couldn't help but study him, trying to see the brother I'd almost lost. How are you really doing? I asked, the question hanging in the air between us. Evan didn't hesitate. I'm better. I'm learning how to be better. His gaze softened, and I saw the flicker of vulnerability in his eyes. But I'm still figuring it out. I nodded, letting the silence stretch out a little. The truth was, I didn't know what the future looked like for either of us, but for the first time in a long time, it didn't seem as hopeless. Whatever had happened, whatever still was happening, we could handle it. Together. Dinner was quieter than usual. It was the first Thanksgiving I could remember without the usual noise, the casual bickering, the endless questions about my future, about Evans. Instead, we ate, we laughed, and for once, there were no silences so heavy that they felt like they might suffocate us. Mom and Dad were finally letting themselves relax, like the fear that had been hanging over them for so long was lifting. I watched Evan a lot during the meal, seeing how he was more present now, more engaged. He'd always been the quieter one, but now he was smiling, laughing even. He was talking about school, about life, and for the first time, it didn't feel like he was just putting on a show. It felt like he was really living again. After dinner, we all gathered around the living room. I kept glancing over at Evan, waiting for some sign that he was still carrying the weight of everything he'd been through, but there was nothing. Not this time. I felt a shift in the air as he sat back, stretching his legs out on the couch. I knew he wasn't completely free of the past, but in that moment, it felt like we were starting to turn the page. Evan leaned back, his eyes fixed on the fireplace. I think I can finally stop running from this. From what happened. His voice was steady, even calm. I felt a lump in my throat at the simple words, the weight they carried. What do you mean? I mean, I don't have to hide anymore. From myself, from you, from Mom and Dad. His eyes met mine, steady. I'm not the same person I was before all this happened, but I don't have to pretend like I am anymore. The quiet that followed was thick with understanding. I couldn't think of anything to say at first. For once, words weren't necessary. Mom broke the silence, her voice soft, almost reverent. I'm just glad to have you home, Evan. Evan smiled, the kind of smile I hadn't seen in years, genuine, warm. I'm glad to be home. And as we sat there, the four of us, something shifted. It wasn't perfect, not by a long shot, but it was real. And for the first time, the weight of the past seemed a little less heavy. We had a long way to go, but for the first time, I felt like maybe we had a chance to get there. Together.